You can think of today's lecture and the next one as a comprehensive wrap-up. Volume 6 of The Story of the Romans is about Caesar's adopted son, Octavian. It's a book I highly recommend, especially if you want to better understand the modern US. The whole Story of the Romans series is great, but Volume 6 is especially worth reading. There's also a show called Domina. You might want to check it out. The title means lady in Latin, and it's about Octavian's wife. It offers an interesting, though dramatized, take on Octavian's life. It didn't get a season 2, probably because it didn't do well commercially. Still, the acting was great. For a historical drama, it did a pretty good job of staying true to history. If you use your imagination, it really helps you picture the world Octavian lived in. At the end of Volume 6, there's a memorable story. The aging emperor is relaxing at the port of Naples when a large ship arrives. The sailors spot him and all run to the deck shouting, "It's the emperor!" And they sing this song. "Thanks to you, we are able to live our lives. Thanks to you, we travel safely. Thanks to you, we live free and in peace." It might sound a little cheesy to us, but the old emperor was deeply pleased. So he ordered that each sailor be given 40 gold coins. The details suggest this story is probably based on historical fact. But there was a condition. They were told to buy goods from Egypt and sell them elsewhere. This map shows the Roman Empire during Octavian's time. The yellow areas are directly governed by Rome. The green parts were run by provincial governors, and the pink areas were allied states, self-governing but Romanized. At that time, Britain wasn't part of the empire yet. Looking at this map, I often wonder, Octavian went against Caesar's orders and tried to invade Germany, but even he failed to conquer it. So I sometimes wonder, what if Octavian had succeeded in conquering Germania? Would Germany have become more civilized earlier? As you can see, Rome covered most of Western Europe, but Germany was left out. Later, Rome did conquer Britain and Romanize what is now England. That's why Scotland and England have very different historical paths, one Romanized, the other not. The fact that Germany never became part of Rome actually explains a lot about German history. History's legacy can be incredibly weighty. So why start with Octavian? Because he was the one who completely transformed Rome's structure. Rome started as a city-state with a monarchy. Then it became a republic, with elections and a remarkably modern political system that fostered its civilization. It faced off against Carthage, eventually defeating them and expanding into North Africa. In the end, the republic ended up run by aristocrats. And the common folks left out of that loop. They started wanting a populist. That populist figure was Julius Caesar. Caesar conquered Gaul, what we now call France. He broadcast his victories, Roman style, and totally won over the youth. And then Caesar crossed the Rubicon. The republic that opposed him was run by the nobles. They backed Pompey, but he lost to Caesar. It was almost inevitable. Pompey was a navy guy, Caesar, a seasoned army general. And since it was a land battle, of course, Caesar won, so Caesar took control. He had a big personality. Maybe he thought everyone liked him. Or maybe he assumed the nobles he forgave would fall in line. Either way, poor security got him killed by the very young men he had mentored. The drama I mentioned earlier, it starts right here. That's why it's so good. Octavian didn't become emperor thanks to his dad. He climbed his way up on his own. All he got was a will from an adopted father who wasn't even a blood relative. Still a minor, he showed up in Rome with that will, ready to claim the throne. Now Caesar had a right-hand man, the powerful and famous Mark Antony. Octavian teamed up with him at first, when he was still weak. Later, when he gained power, he crushed Antony and Cleopatra and took full control. Even after taking power, it wasn't smooth sailing. People still had strong hopes of returning to the Republic. They thought once the endless civil wars ended, things would go back to the way they were. So Octavian had to put on an act. Every year he stepped down and got re-elected, just for show. That show became a regular thing in Roman politics. So Rome was basically an empire, but kept the look of a republic. Now here's why I'm telling you all this. Those sailors who praised Octavian Probably not even Roman. They were likely from the Iberian Peninsula or somewhere like that. Places that used to be outside Rome, now conquered. People who didn't need to play local politics anymore, just trade and live. One good thing about empires, they wipe out local politics. That's actually a plus. Empires aren't all bad. They're great for people out on the fringes. Without the empire, they'd be ruled by local warlords. And that rule, usually way harsher than any imperial system. So why does a universal system benefit those outside the political game? Because it has to be universal. It may not apply to the players in power, but it gives the rest predictable, consistent rules. It ends up looking like rule of law, predictable and surprisingly fair. That's the upside for those on the empire's edge who just want to live, not play politics. But empires do infringe on local autonomy. So local strongmen tend to hate them because they'd rather run things their own way. But when an empire shows up, they have to send their sons to serve it. They'd send their sons, and if those sons made it into the imperial elite, then the family had real power back home. But without an empire, they could just keep power locally, no strings attached. So if you were a commoner living in the provinces, empire was actually good for you. If you had the choice, that is. But that's not how we were taught. We were told empire is always bad. You should really ask whose idea was that. Just being honest, you feel me? Remember that weird thing I said last time, that people who push for democracy are really fans of bureaucracy? And those who preach liberalism are actually defending imperialism? Yeah, I meant that. Because idealists think they're choosing something good. Like the best of all possible options. Those types, they're not so bad. But most idealists, they think they're choosing good over evil. Like they're the heroes in some drama. And they stick to that childish worldview their whole lives. The better kind of idealists ask different questions. They ask, am I more of a liberal or more democratic? But realists, people like me, though there aren't many in Korea, we weren't really taught this stuff formally. We learned it ourselves through books, thinking, experience, and we realized in the real world it's about picking the lesser evil. That's what realism is. So when someone starts going on about democracy, you can just think, he wants a bureaucrat's paradise. So, and if someone pushes liberalism, you can think, he's all about universalism, the kind that needs a violent imperial core to make it work. So what should I choose then? Empire, bureaucracy? Do you think arbitrary local rule is better, or a universal order born from imperial palace politics? Think about it. If human history is the story of civilization, then civilization is mostly the story of empires. Because Homo sapiens are wired for group behavior. An individual can't beat a group. It's not even close. So, what's the best option left? Civilization respects the individual, and that's not just a modern idea. That's why women's rights often rise with the peak of civilization. Because there used to be something called the castle rule. It means a husband hits his wife, she calls the police, and when cops show up, he says, "This is my castle, stay out." That actually worked in the US until just a few decades ago. Why? Because a man's home was his castle. He didn't have life and death power, but he basically ran the household. Now tell me, do fathers still have that kind of power in America today? Nope, not anymore. But until recently they did. Where do you think that castle rule came from? It came from the power that feudal lords used to have. Power over whom? Over the king himself. The king handles the kingdom inside my domain, I'm in charge. That same logic applied to fathers in the household. Why do Muslim women have to wear hijabs? Because they want to, for fashion? Sure, that happens, but many wear it because not doing so could mean an honor killing. She may want to go without it, but her brother might literally beat her to death. And that's socially accepted in many Islamic societies. That's what local rule looks like. It's hard to generalize who benefits from local rule. But one thing's clear, women usually get the worst of it. That's pretty universal. If you've served in the military, you'll get this. It's actually better for a private if the officer holds the power. Better that than a sergeant having life or death authority over you. Sounds strange, right? Sure, officers and sergeants come in all types. But here's what I'm asking you. Is it better to be under universal rules or personal rule by locals? In a money-based economy built on specialization, would you prefer an empire or fragmented nation-states? Empire, obviously, because empire means trade. Empire brings economic growth, no borders in the way, fewer people extorting you, more division of labor. When goods flow freely, everyone gets richer. That's what we call Pax Romana or Pax Americana today. But we live in strange times. We live under Pax Americana, yet hate imperialism. That's a contradiction. You can't have it both ways. Either admit America's being hypocritical, saying they're not imperial while acting like it, or say, maybe this really is something different. Maybe America isn't an empire, but still somehow runs the world. Pick one. Most people don't really think this through. It's easier to just go with option one, hypocrites. But if you do that, you've got to take the logic all the way. That means within a few years, America's political system should collapse. That's why I tell you, read volume 6 of The Story of the Romans. To achieve Pax Romana, Rome had to abandon the Republic. So a few elite Roman families built personal ties with each province. And those families ended up supporting the emperor system. I haven't mapped out every causal link, enough for a paper anyway. But hey, I've read a ton of books. The more I read and thought about it, I started seeing a pattern. An empire's job is to suppress local conflicts. Whether the emperor is legit or not, honestly, who cares? That's not the point. Watch the show Domina. It's about Octavian. You'll see him doing all kinds of shady stuff. Assassinations, power plays, you name it, but that's just drama. Don't judge it with good VAs. Evil empires have a job to do. It doesn't have to be good, it just has to be imperial. If it's not acting like an empire, being nice means nothing. Its job is peace, stopping locals from fighting each other. For Rome, that meant stopping Greeks and Jews from clashing. Rome had to mediate. They were business rivals in the Eastern Mediterranean, both super smart. The Greeks gave us philosophy, and the Jews gave us Christian-style ethics. Those two threads wove together to build Western civilization. Socrates said, and Jesus said, that's the foundation. Same back in Roman times. Rome couldn't let those two groups fight. That's what the empire was for, to keep the peace. So think about it. Let's say you're the heart of the empire, and you always side with the Greeks. Can that empire last? Of course not. You've got to keep some kind of balance, right? Just like in the World Cup. So how do you make that fairness real? We're human, not AI, just people. So here's how it works. Rome had noble families. Some represented Greece, others Judea. But when a populace rises, that balance breaks. That might explain the last 10 years and the next 10 in US politics. If you picked option one earlier, America might actually be moving away from democracy. Maybe it wasn't hypocrisy, just a delay in facing the truth. America has a choice to make. Will it stay a global empire meddling everywhere, or will it stick to Republican values and step back? Now here's the good news for anti-Americans. Pax Americana isn't exactly built to last, as we've seen. It takes a ton of artificial effort to keep it going. At times it looks like a total mess. But here's the sad part for anti-Americans. If US power fades, it's not going to bring the happy ending they imagined. It'll feel more like the start of Armageddon. That's why people want America to be a model of democracy. Like Confucius said, remember what we talked about last time? America was supposed to be the North Star, right? But the world doesn't follow Confucius like that. Take China or Joseon. Talked about ruling with virtue, but it was anything but virtuous. You had to slice waists or skin people to get obedience. The state claimed Confucian ideals, but in reality they just cut people down. Don't mistake talk for truth. Just because the US and UK lead in democracy, does the whole world go, wow, I want democracy too? The world doesn't work like that. This isn't some fairy tale land. You've got to punish, scold, sanction. Only then do people listen. So what do you want America to do in this brutal world? Should it drop democracy and go full empire? Or give up empire and just become one strong nation among many? Should it crawl back into the genie's lamp? You've got to answer that for yourself, existentially. Think about what that means for you. And for raising your kids, that's where real ideology starts. Without that reflection, it's all just posturing. Talking politics without putting your existence on the line, it's laughable. How do we even know what's good for us? I recommended these two books to you. They cover different things, but say the same thing. You'll get it once you read them. The left one's about 1,000 years of piracy after Rome. The right one's Peter Zehan's The End of the World is Just the Beginning, which basically says, if you're not America, you're screwed. Especially you, Korea. He doesn't sugarcoat it. The Mediterranean after Rome, 1,000-year pirate zone. If you haven't read Shiono Nanami's book, it's worth it. Super interesting. Left side, Saracen pirates. Right side, Christian ones. In southern Italy, you'll see these Saracen towers, 4 or 5 stories tall. Not really for fighting. No one's shooting arrows from in there. They were just warning towers. When pirates came, people ran to the hills. Those sunny Greek and Italian beaches, abandoned for nearly 1,000 years after Rome fell. So what happens if pirates catch you? If you resist, you're dead. If not, you're dragged off to the bathhouse. They called it that because they stripped you naked like livestock. Naked, detained, and sold as slaves. Women were forcibly converted. Why? Under Islamic law, you can't sleep with non-Muslims. So they made women convert first, then came the rest. Until the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, the West kept losing ground to the Ottomans. Unlike the strong West, we imagine, they were actually weak back then. Pirates didn't really disappear from the Mediterranean until the 1800s, after France invaded and conquered North Africa. The collapse of Rome, the fallout, lasted a really long time. Once order breaks down, rebuilding it takes forever. The Mediterranean's small, if you look at a world map, and it still took over 1,000 years just to restore order there. We need to stop thinking that order is the default. If you do, you'll never get how the Catholic Church worked in the Middle Ages. Why did the Catholic Church look so much like a state? It was never actually a state. It was more like the UN. And the UN isn't a state, right? But the UN has moral authority. Humans are weird. We care deeply about symbols and legitimacy. Unlike the Romans, the Germanic tribes were great at fighting. But they were uncivilized, couldn't even read. Even their nobles were illiterate. So Christianity was used to tame these white samurai who couldn't read. They used religion to give people a reason to get along. Because the Catholic Church wasn't an empire, so when France and England fought, it couldn't stop them. But it tried really hard to give the fighting some kind of higher cause. If you look at European history, it's just constant battles between lords and kings. It was all fragmented. After the Western Roman Empire fell, Europe stayed divided for 1,000 years. If you stop assuming order is the norm, you'll see how much energy humans spend just trying to build order. We pour tons of energy into it. Sure, religion talks about the afterlife, but really it plays an even bigger role in this life. Religion is more powerful in shaping society than most people realize. It gives people a reason, an excuse to follow order. You'll get it when you compare two situations. One where the strongest guy wins just because, and one where at least people pretend to justify why they should be king. As a citizen, which do you think leads to fewer wars? And which one's more likely to explode into violence? That's what the Crusades were. The Pope raising a common banner. Western Europe was a mess, so he gave them a shared enemy. Don't see it as right or wrong, just as a way to create peace at home. To understand all this, you've got to understand the nature of the sea. Of course, we all know what the sea is, but go there in person, and it's rough. Try comparing it to a river. The sea is wide, rivers are calm. I once took a trip. I went around southern Korea with a friend, the Seomjin River, super peaceful. But once you hit the southern sea, it's a whole different beast. To humans, the sea is a world of chaos. Those Waigu pirates we talk about, they were international thieves. So it wasn't just Japanese, there were Chinese too. Actually, more Chinese than Japanese. There were all kinds, Chinese, Southeast Asians, all mixed in. Korea back then, Joseon banned its people from going out to sea. Why? Because security was a huge problem. They couldn't protect anyone. The state's power didn't reach the sea, because they couldn't set up posts or bases out there. Humans are deeply post-oriented. We always build around hubs. That's why archaeologists always look for posts when they dig. Say they find a stone X, Was it part of a base or just dropped during a random hunt? Imagine sprinkling yourself with radioactive tracers and tracking your picnic as lines on a map. You'd see you go to a point, set up base, and move from there. Even on a weekend trip, you make a hub, then branch out from it. Zoom in, and that base has its own little network. Even at someone's house, you settle into a spot and move from there. You get what I mean? So why is the sea so chaotic? Because there's nowhere for states to build those posts. That's why islands in key positions matter so much. There's a paper by Park Young-min, a diplomat and professor. You can look it up. It talks about today's world and the weird nature of global order. Point one, it's not everyone contributes equally. Obvious, sure, but worth repeating. When it comes to maintaining order at sea, it's not like the Marshall Islands did as much as the US. But where do ships register? Not the US. They fly flags from the Marshall Islands. Point two, free trade needs expensive public goods, and rule of law is one of them, like protecting intellectual property. But patents are invisible. Without state enforcement, they're easy to steal. Point three, today's global order is fragile. It only works in this rare moment. So this professor, he'd pick option two. Makes sense. He's a diplomat. He might want to say option one like you, but imagine a Korean diplomat calling America a bunch of hypocrites. So he says option two, this is just a very unique system. An imperial world with no empire. How unstable is that? If the empire acted like an empire, it wouldn't be so shaky. But this one, it's ready to walk away anytime, super fragile. We live with two stories at once. In reality, order comes from US aircraft carriers showing up. But we pretend it's because of the UN and international meeting. That's a total illusion. Nothing actually gets enforced through those meetings. If someone breaks the rules, what are you going to do? With Confucian-style moral leadership? Like, they'll behave if we behave? So who's going to go cut someone's waist or skin them alive? Who's going to get blood on their hands? That's the problem. Sadly, events happened that made it possible for the US to pull back from Eurasia. First, it's because of America's unique geography. The US is protected by two oceans, Atlantic and Pacific. It's a natural fortress. Two great powers don't have that luxury, Russia and China, right? Why is Russia so big? Because they had to stretch all the way to the sea. They had to push their borders to the coast. But in the West, they couldn't reach it. Germany and others blocked them. That's part of why they're always so aggressive. China, no real hope. They have a coast, but it's a closed sea. They're boxed in by Taiwan, Okinawa, Japan. And Japan is one long island chain. Look at a map. China has nowhere to go, and the West even worse. But America, huge oceans on both sides. It's hard for the US to go out, but nearly impossible for the world to bring weapons in. Sure, someone could come from the north, but Canada's a close friend. Same language even. Mexico, let's be honest, no chance. They're anti-American, sure, but they're not a real threat. The big task back then, containing the Soviet Union, using allies, that was priority one for the US. That's why they gave countries like Korea access to US markets, to pull them into their camp and block Soviet expansion across Eurasia. Sure, it looked like a rule-based global system, but when rules got broken, it was the US that bled and fought. That's what happened in Korea and Vietnam. And every time American politics took a hit, Korea nearly blew up when MacArthur pushed too hard, too soon. In Vietnam, slow involvement made American idealists demand withdrawal, and the system almost collapsed again. Then Kissinger and Nixon flipped China, which helped contain the USSR and win the Cold War. But China wasn't democratic, not just in system, but in values too. They brought in a country whose beliefs were totally unlike the West's. And the price, American society spun into unbridled pluralism. Suddenly, no one knew who was friend or foe anymore. That was the cost. And we've lived in that world for about 30 years now. The ideology got blurry. The camps lost their clarity. China's on our side. Wait, is it? So the US won the Cold War, kind of as a temporary strategy. And from then on, it started wondering how to pull out. But momentum carried it forward. It just kept acting like an empire. Like that option one we talked about, it just kept going. In geopolitics, we call that the failure of idealist foreign policy. America got too involved, stuck its nose in everything. Realists say the smart move would have been to withdraw during George H.W. Bush's time. Pull out of Korea, pull out of the Middle East, let local powers deal with local problems. Europe, leave it to Britain, Germany, France. But the US didn't do that. It kept the unipolar system alive. Al-Qaeda's attacks didn't start with 9/11. It began earlier with a US destroyer being hit. Then there's North Korea's nuclear program, which we all know about. The NPT system, non-proliferation, may seem unfair at first. But if you admit how unique nukes are, it makes sense to limit who can have them. The ideal was big powers freeze and slowly reduce what they already have. The US and USSR both agreed on this. So when the USSR still existed, North Korea couldn't go rogue with nukes. Sure, they dreamed of it, like Park Chung-hee did. But then the USSR collapsed. One superpower left. And that gave North Korea room to move. They built nukes, and here we are. The US couldn't stop it. Post-Soviet democratization mostly failed. Not every case, but most of them didn't work out. Take Hungary. Hard to call that a democracy now. Then in 2001, 9/11 hit, direct attacks on US soil. The American people were in collective shock for 20 years. That's what led to the Kabul withdrawal in 2021. In a way, America lived under 9/11's shadow for 2 decades. They sent young Americans to die in places like Iraq and Afghanistan that had almost no strategic value. The US had no real gain there. If anything, it lost. Especially in Iraq, Saddam's Sunni government ruled over a Shia majority. So to check Iran, the US needed a Sunni-run Iraq. But America dismantled the Sunnis, so now there's no one left in the Middle East to contain Iran. And then came Trumpism. It's called Trumpism, but it really started under Obama. Forget trade, give us jobs. Trumpism came before Trump. He just slapped his name on it, ran with it, and won votes. Russia's geopolitical move started with Georgia in 2010, but it wasn't obvious until Crimea in 2014. And now in 2022, we're seeing the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Since the 2010s, the US has been shifting from intervention to isolation. As we've studied, America swings between idealism, isolationism, and realism. And isolationism came back as what we now call Trumpism. But it's never just one thing. Momentum mixes them all. In US history, it's never been black and white. You'll always find idealism inside realism or isolationism inside idealism. But here's what we really need to watch now. The Ukraine war is turning out. Unexpectedly expected. Russia's performance has been a mess. Makes you wonder if they're really number 2 in military power. If Ukraine actually beats them back, it'll be a major case study for the US. George Friedman, the geopolitics guy we read, is talking about this a lot. Why send American troops? It costs too much politically at home. So why do it if you don't have to? Not a single US soldier went to Ukraine. If locals are ready to fight, America can just support from behind. Sanctions, we'll study this later, squeezed Russia hard. And with enough weapons, Ukraine could actually beat them. Then the US might think, why didn't we do this in Korea or Vietnam? What were we thinking? Sure, maybe that was the only way back then. But if the Ukraine model works, it could challenge Peter Zeihan's whole prediction. He says the US will pull out of Eurasia entirely. But if Ukraine alone can stop Russian ambition and dictators, then maybe America can scale down without fully withdrawing. The money is not the issue for the US, It's sending American kids to die. That's not acceptable to Americans, because America's not a classic empire. If it were, it could say, die for the glory of empire, but that phrase doesn't fly in America. It did in Britain, though. British youth went to India, to Sudan, and died for the empire's glory. Back then, imperialism wasn't a dirty word. It wasn't taboo. That's why we need to pay attention. Ukraine is the wild card. Let's talk about the World Cup. In 2015, FIFA president Sepp Blatter, he was up for a fifth term and everything was set up in his favor. Then Swiss police stormed the hotel in Zurich and arrested FIFA officials. I paid close attention to that case, not because I'm a football fan, but because FIFA and the IOC are global bodies without political authority. They weren't created or declared by the UN, yet anywhere in the world they get more respect than UN reps. So what do they have? Each of their 150 to 170 member nations gets one vote. The US, one vote, same as Togo. And what do they vote on? Where to host the events? You think they were corrupt or not? Let's just reason it out. FIFA and the IOC, are they angels? Everywhere they go, they get diplomatic privileges. They're not even diplomats, yet they get that kind of treatment. These guys decide where the Olympics and World Cup happen. One vote for the US, one vote for Togo, same weight. You think they stayed clean or nah? Even if they were angels, they'd still get corrupted. But unfortunately, they're not angels. So yeah, FIFA being corrupt, everyone knows that. In 2015, Swiss police raided a hotel over FIFA bribery. It wasn't the US government. Swiss cops did that part. But the FBI, they raided FIFA's US office in Miami. So yeah, America got involved. They'd been gathering intel for nearly a decade. But the key, it's all geopolitics. In 2010, FIFA awarded the 2018 World Cup to Russia. The US didn't like it, but hey, it was FIFA's call. So the US kept that in the drawer. Could pull it out 20 years later if needed. Someone's always keeping receipts. Then in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, and boom, here come the indictments. The real targets, the votes for Russia 2018 and Qatar 2022. Money changed hands. US reps, African reps, all kinds. But here's the key point. All that stuff, not even the most important part. The real question is, why is the US doing this? Those FIFA officials, not even American, they weren't even in the US, they didn't take American money. Probably took Russian or Qatari money. So why is America investigating and charging them in US court? First, where else would you do it? In a Korean court, French court, you might think, wait, isn't there some kind of international court for that? There's not. Here's what the US prosecutor said. These guys used US financial networks to move money, which means they entered US legal jurisdiction. Everything's in dollars. So even virtually, it all goes through American banks. I actually used this point in a lecture once. Like back in 2014, I gave a talk on Bitcoin, gathered a room full of people. Bitcoin devs, app builders, early adopters. It was a small scene back then. I told them, even if you're not American, even if you're just building blockchain stuff, don't think the US legal system doesn't apply to you. That's naive. In finance and law enforcement, America really is the world police. That's what I told them. If your money touches the US financial system, even virtually, it's in their hands. Some indictments came as early as 2014. The arrests followed in 2015. Putin freaked out. He said the US is meddling in things outside their borders. But it wasn't the president who responded. The US prosecutor said the money went through our banks. That's how the US starts sanctioning things like crypto money laundering and fraud based on jurisdiction. So let's think about this. Whether or not it's an empire, who else would step in? It might feel unfair, but if FIFA or IOC folks are taking bribes, who's going to prosecute that? Who else investigates it? These guys operated in a legal no man's land, completely rotten with corruption. Imagine a corrupt place, like China, in parentheses. It's unfair if only American companies can't pay bribes. Guess who said that? President Trump. He tweeted that while in office, not just as a candidate. There's an old US law called the FCPA. It was created in 1977 after Watergate. It lets the US prosecute foreigners and foreign companies who bribe people abroad if they operate in the US. Not just Americans or American firms. Even if you're just a foreigner living in the US and you bribe a Korean official, you can be tried in US court. Other countries may have similar laws, but they rarely go after non-citizens. Well, maybe China would. The point is, it exists, and the US actually enforces it. That's what's wild. The US really is like a world government. Primary and secondary sanctions, those are the scariest tools. And secondary sanctions, deadly. Primary is straightforward. Sanctioning Iran directly, for example. Cutting Iran off from SWIFT. Blocking oil sales in dollars. That kind of thing. You block Iran from doing those things. But secondary means hitting those who do business with Iran. Like even their main bank gets sanctioned by the US. Whole countries can be affected right now. About 1/4 of the world's population lives under US financial sanctions. Some say, conspiracy theory or not, South Korea almost got hit too. We were close to getting caught in a secondary sanction, so the theory goes, they wiped the evidence quietly. Supposedly, the SNS we all use went down twice. That's what the theory says. It was like, oops, technical error, twice in a row. The idea is, if they didn't delete everything, Korea could have faced serious sanctions. Even as an ally, if it came out, the US would have to act. But that would be messy. So the story goes, just erase it quietly, we'll let it slide. That's supposedly why your SNS went down twice. Once wasn't enough, maybe. So it happened again to finish the job. And remember, secondary sanctions, they don't come from international meetings, they come from the US. When you think about legal control over finance, yeah, America acts like an empire. Shall we talk about Ethereum now? When Ethereum completed the merge, Vitalik Buterin and ETH supporters probably thought the party had begun. Victory, we did what Bitcoin never could. Governance, technical upgrade, everything. I mean, I'm not saying I fully agree. It's pretty technical. They said it was like swapping an airplane engine mid-flight. Can you even do that? That's impossible, right? So if they pulled that off, shouldn't ETH's price have skyrocketed? Before the merge, people were like, we're finally going to beat Bitcoin. I wish they did. But then, bam, they got slapped twice by the US government. First, Gary Gensler at the SEC said, that looks like a security. Because POS, proof of stake, pays interest. So yeah, that's a security. Just like that. That was hit number one. Second, one crypto company got sanctioned for money laundering, and because it used the Ethereum network, US regulators expected Ethereum validators to block it. That's called OFAC compliance, US Treasury stuff. It's not just about sanctioning Tornado Cash. It's the fact that it's on Ethereum, so validators were asked to comply too. So inside the ETH community, people started asking, if we follow all the rules, are we still a blockchain? Latest reports say 75% of ETH validators now follow OFAC rules. Validators are supposed to confirm transactions neutral, but now they're basically under US legal control. Like if the US says, this wallet is shady, don't approve their NFTs or DeFi. Validators may block even legit transactions. So what does that violate? We covered this a couple sessions ago. Imagine Treasury says, hey, that guy, Otaimin, is a terrorist. He just moved Ether, cancel that transaction, don't approve it. Even though it's valid on chain, validators say no. What's that break? Neutrality. Ethereum is broken at that point. You could even say this isn't a blockchain, it's a pet. That's not what I personally believe though. Could this happen with Bitcoin miners? Nope, they can't do that. ETH folks talked big but ended up folding. Why? Because they're exposed. They get warned, keep poking us and you're banned from the US and UK. Vitalik was too idealistic, probably didn't see this coming. So now they're working on alternatives. Not sure about the tech, but here's the new idea. Even non-designated nodes might be able to validate. Honestly, I'm not totally sure how that works. Maybe just go back to proof of work. It worked fine. See how Bitcoin, geopolitics, and US sanctions, it's all connected? Everything is connected. That's how the world works. During the FTX mess, Harvard put out a paper and mainstream media went crazy over it. And it's actually a fun paper. You know what it says? It tells foreign central banks, buy Bitcoin. Because it's to avoid US sanctions. Wait, Harvard's in what country again? That's the US for you. America's pride and joy, right? Imagine if Seoul National University published a paper saying, telling foreign countries buy Bitcoin, Korea might sanction you someday. How is that not hilarious? I thought it was super interesting. America's a strange country. If the US makes business too unpredictable or blocks global money flows too much, then money might move away entirely and the US loses its central role in global finance. And then sanctions won't work anymore either. Sending troops, too politically risky now. And international meetings, someone still has to get their hands dirty. France, Canada, not happening. They're the ones always talking about peace and fairness, right? So in the end, the US just hits with what it knows best. Financial sanctions, better than blood on your hands. But now it's getting overused. I mean, what counts as too much? Still, maybe they can't help it. It's cheaper than war and better than doing nothing. North Korea launches a missile sanction. Iran acts up sanction. Sanction, sanction, sanction. Right now, 25% of the global population lives under sanction regimes. Okay, does it even work? Not really, but they keep doing it because what else is there? Eventually, this leads to de-dollarization. Who said that? Obama's own Treasury Secretary, Jacob Lew. And honestly, he makes a solid point. There's always a price. You can already see it in US-EU tensions, like the SWIFT debate. SWIFT isn't a government or a company, it's something in between. Headquartered in Belgium. It started in the 70s. Now over 11,000 banks worldwide use it. It's basically a messaging system, a secure messenger for banks. So why is just messaging enough to move money? Because bills of exchange were already just messages. A bill of exchange is just, here's a note that says I owe you, now go cash it. That becomes the money. So no actual gold or cash moves. In theory, the entire transaction finishes via paper. But here's the catch. The issuer better have solid credit. Some sketchy guy scribbling an IOU, that's just junk paper. That's why between banks it's all bills of exchange. No need for real dollars or gold to move. So these bills of exchange just keep circulating. Like, hey, you take this, I owe him anyway, I'll write it down. So now he can collect from him. Then he signs it over again and again and again. It's just a message system, really. So if I send money from Cookman Bank to a bank in Switzerland, even if they don't have a direct system between them, using SWIFT, it works like bills of exchange. Money still moves. It's a communication protocol. Most of SWIFT's board members are European bankers. Then Trump came in, thinking Obama was too soft on Iran. He'd been saying that since before getting elected. And as soon as he took office, he pulled out of the Iran deal. Europe had sanctioned Iran for years. Then Obama brought cash, made hostage deals, call it what you want. So Europe was ready to do business with Iran again. Then Trump steps in and slaps sanctions right back on. You can imagine Europe wasn't thrilled. SWIFT pushed back like, we're not going along with this. They really thought America's not an empire. Trump's people responded, we'll sanction every board member you've got. They didn't say it outright, but made sure everyone understood. The US isn't like China. China would just say it straight. The US hints, you get the message. And SWIFT board members, they've got lives to protect. They might have wanted to resist, but they probably have kids in the US or bank accounts. So they caved and kicked Iran back out. Didn't last long, SWIFT gave in. When NSA files were leaked by Edward Snowden, one of them said the NSA monitors SWIFT traffic. Of course they do, to stop money laundering. So Russia built its own system, SPFS, System for Transfer of Financial Messages. It's a SWIFT alternative. China's version is called CIPS, Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. Ripple fans think SWIFT will eventually evolve into something built on Ripple tech. There's even a proposal, and Ripple is the only blockchain company involved. Basically, that's Ripple's vision. SWIFT is outdated, Ripple thinks they're the replacement. So now, three systems are competing with SWIFT. The US controls SWIFT too much, even though it's not even an American company. So what shows up? Screw America systems. Russia's SPFS. China's CIPS. Ripple's Ripple. That's the game we're playing. So yeah, it's not a game for amateurs. Don't jump in blindly. It's not about the tech. This is aircraft carrier level stuff. Why is de-dollarization such a big problem for the US? It's such a threat that even the French president keeps bringing it up. Honestly, France is the most anti-American of them all. Sure, Russia and China are anti-US too. But they'd flip in a second if the US gave them what they wanted. Like if the US said, fine, Ukraine's yours, instant friendship. And China, they were pro-American for years. We talked about that. Say Taiwan's yours, boom, back to friendly terms. But France, doesn't matter what the US does, they're always anti-American. Most anti-American philosophy, basically made in France. Even Macron, whole crew's anti-American, probably just pride. I get it. France is dying to take down the dollar. Then there's Russia and China. Why are they yelling about de-dollarization too? Why is the dollar such a benefit for America? It's just money, right? Can't we just use euros instead? There are two things you need to know. Seriously, these matter. First, the dollar is US debt. Dollars held abroad are claims on US assets. Remember, all fiat money is central bank debt. If a foreigner holds 50,000 won, it means they hold a claim on Korean assets worth that amount. Dollars are debt, but here's the twist. If demand stays high, unlike securities, dollars just circulate. They rarely get redeemed. Only a fraction gets cashed in. The rest piles up in dollar reservoirs. They use dollars to trade oil, semiconductors among themselves. If Japan and Korea trade using dollars, not yen or won, America doesn't get the bill. The claim never comes back, as if US debt is infinite. Not realistic, but if it were, that debt would never get called in. It's like issuing IOUs you never have to repay. Pretty sweet deal, right? So what do foreign central banks do with those dollars? They send them back and buy US treasuries because dollars don't earn interest. Now that part, number two, is a bit debatable. But number one, money equals claim on assets, that's rock solid. When foreigners use dollars, it's like America prints risk-free debt. Again, number two is more up for debate. The key thing is buying treasuries, not necessarily that it's done in dollars. Still, this is how most people explain it. Even academic books tend to gloss over this part. So let's just go with it. Foreign central banks usually prefer long-term US bonds over holding raw dollars. That's hugely important for the US. That's a privilege only the US enjoys. Is it because of the dollar or just because people trust America? We haven't fully unpacked that one yet. But global demand for US debt is still huge. And yeah, bonds are government debt and all governments issue them. So how does the government repay that debt? They issue new bonds to pay the old ones. Basically, it's debt they never really have to repay. And that's a privilege all governments enjoy. When one matures, they just roll it over with a new one. If a 10-year bond matures, they issue a new one, but they still have to pay interest in cash. Interest has to be paid in actual money. Bond prices and yields are inversely related. Discount too much and it's bad. So higher interest rates mean lower bond prices and vice versa. So what does the US want? High or low interest rates? If you want to sell a $100 bond close to $100, as close to face value as possible, because future value is usually discounted. So to sell a bond now for its full future value, do you want a high or low interest rate? This one's easy. High rates, low prices, low rates, high prices. The US wants to sell bonds at high prices. They use bond revenue to fund infrastructure, Medicare, all of it. So what's better, selling them high or low? High price, of course, so low interest rate, right? Exactly, low. So when do interest rates stay low? When demand is high or low? When demand is high. If everyone's scrambling to buy US bonds, if yields drop, prices go up, great deal for the US. This is the privilege America enjoys. Argentina can't do that. Would you buy their bonds? They'd have to sell them at a huge discount just to move them. These two things are why reserve currency status gives the US such an edge. Good to know, right? Just keep these in mind. So why is issuing bonds so important to governments? If private sector returns are higher than government bond yields, then what? Remember last time we talked about Keynes? Why did Keynes say government spending matters? Because of what effect? What happens when the government spends? Multiplier effect, right? And what cancels that out? Crowding out effect. If the government raises taxes, people have less to spend. So instead, they issue bonds and spend that money. That gives you the multiplier effect. And people still keep their money because taxes didn't go up. If private returns are high, future tax revenues will rise. It's mathematically provable. So the government faces a dilemma. Say you need to spend 1 million won. Do you issue a bond or collect taxes? How do you decide? From the government's perspective, issuing debt is better than pulling 1 million won from the private sector in taxes. Why? Because the private sector earns more than the government. So better not to take their money now. So you issue bonds to spend money, you've got to fund the military, right? You issue debt. So when the private sector is dynamic and growing, issuing bonds makes sense. You can spend without raising taxes. It's a smart move. And later, as tax revenue grows, you can pay the interest. But that same logic also explains how debt spirals start. If bonds sell cheap, the government ends up draining private vitality. The bigger the discount, the more bonds you have to issue. More debt means higher interest rates, and that kills private investment. Then you're stuck raising taxes just to pay interest. Basically, public debt crushes the private sector. So the key is to issue debt without raising yields. Only the US can pull that off. When the US issues bonds, rich people everywhere rush to buy. So they don't have to discount, they can issue debt, collect less tax, and still stimulate the economy. Other countries can't do that. They lose credibility fast. Private returns and interest rates aren't independent. The key for the US and Korea too is to keep bond yields low while maintaining spending. Underline this. It's the core mechanism for sustaining an empire. Not just America, this applied to the British Empire too. Low bond yields plus steady government spending arm empire maintenance. Empires cost money, lots of it. You need fleets, troops, and to suppress local conflicts. And you have to do all that without raising interest rates. Normal countries get stuck in a vicious cycle. But the US isn't questioned. That's a unique position. People keep saying America's finished. Have you seen the dollar? Does that look like a dying empire? In a crisis, what do people turn to as a safe haven? Gold, dollar, Bitcoin, Ethereum. It's the dollar, of course. Strangely enough, people still trust the US government. It won't last forever, sure. But here's what happens in non-US countries. They can't cover trade deficits by selling bonds to foreigners because too much deficit kills investor trust. Then rates spike, bonds tank. But to keep spending, they issue even more debt. And that drives rates higher, killing private investment. So even with more taxes, you barely break even, or worse, eat into your capital. To avoid a total collapse in currency trust, they go to the IMF. We've been through that in Korea, haven't we? You go to the IMF and say, we're about to default, help, then they give you terms. So what kind of terms does the IMF set? Totally unpopular stuff, strict austerity, tighten your belt. Higher taxes, spending cuts, tighter money, which means economic slowdown. Every country, except the US, goes to the IMF if they overuse debt. The US doesn't have to. But Peter Zeihan thinks even that will come to an end. All right, let's wrap up here for today. Next session will be a full review. We'll look at charts and explore whether this era continues or ends. Great work today, everyone. Next week is the final class. Make sure you come. See you then.